rules. Who is this ghastly man?
Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
And you must be the Monopoly guy.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Microeconomics. And as you can guess from the very famous clip of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, today we are talking about monopolies and the impact that they have on all other market structures. All right, let me adjust the focus here for you real quick. And so, like I said, we're going to be talking about a pure monopoly. And with a pure monopoly, it's the opposite end of the spectrum of pure competition. If you ever get confused, just always think about your goal in the game of Monopoly and how you always want to control every single thing there is. So I hope you get something out of this, and we will be talking about the characteristics here of a monopoly, just like what we did with pure competition. Remember, you can always look at that chart at the beginning of chapter 9 and break it down with those stuff that I gave you in the last video. So first off, in a monopoly, there is one single seller. All right, obviously that's why it's called a monopoly. There's one person that sells this. There are no close substitutes. That's why it's be a monopoly. It's all good. Unlike pure competition, they are not price takers. Instead, they are price makers, meaning they have complete and total control over the market. There is also something called blocked entry. All right, a little bit later on, we are going to be talking about something called barriers to entry. And one of these must exist in order for a monopoly to exist. And finally, there is something called non-price competition. Now, what non-price competition is simply, do you need the item? All right, and that monopolist has to convince you that you need it. So we're talking about a public relations type thing, advertising, because if there's no substitute for it and you don't really need it, why do I need to buy it? Why does this product need to exist? So we allow this to happen. All right, so under today's laws, for a monopoly to exist is very, very rare. You know, we talk about the old days. We talk about Rockefeller and Carnegie and, you know, the good old robber barons and everything. Those don't exist anymore. The closest thing we've ever had in recent time to a monopoly is Microsoft. Microsoft at one point actually had 90% of all new computers were putting in Windows in order to function. And when they were taken to court, the judge simply said, yeah, we'll fine them, but we're not going to break them up and we're not going to punish them any more than that, because it's technology. If you don't like it, make something better. So that's kind of cool that Microsoft was found to be a monopolist, but was not punished for it. We do have some near or geographical monopolies, meaning they are the only one near the situation. For example, before the Jewel went in Spring Grove, the only grocery store in Richmond Spring Grove was Vans. So in essence, if you needed something, you had to go to Vans, which gave them a geographical monopoly. But you could have a government-regulated monopoly. Usually this is your natural gas and electric. There are no competition for it because it would be better that there wasn't in this situations. And sometimes you have to actually have to talk about a device that people use, and I bet you have used this, but not very many people need it because it's a very specialty item. And this is a device created by the company called the Brannock Shoe Device Company. And for those of you who don't know what the Brannock Shoe Device Company makes, if you've ever gone to a shoe store and you've seen those metal shoe measure or foot measuring devices, they own 80% of all shoe measuring devices, which is kind of cool. Another example of a geographical monopoly would be a sports team, right? Or a TV station. There's not two Channel 5 NBCs in Chicago. There are two baseball teams, but you don't have both in the American League or in the National League. You have one in each league. So we can keep that separated to make that work. Okay? So, as I said, another thing that we would be talking about are the barriers to entry. These are things that allow the monopolist to exist. Something that you cannot do because of, or you cannot enter the market because the monopolist has control of this. For example, one of the things that you guys will have looked at on a previous assignment are something called economies of scale. This is when we talk about a decline in average total cost due to something that only this monopoly has. Monopoly can make it better, faster, more efficient, allocatively efficient, productively efficient than anybody else, and a new company trying to come in can't afford it. So they have the bigger firm size, and they allow them to create a declining average total cost, which allows them to control the industry. A second barrier to entry are legal barriers. Some big things that are legal barriers. You have patents. All right, the company who designed it, built it, they're the only ones that can make it for 20 years. That's how long a patent lasts. We can also talk about licenses. This is where a government issues something. For example, like in New York, before Uber and Lyft existed, there was only one company that was able to issue taxis there. And like I also mentioned earlier, a TV station. I don't know if you remember, WGN used to be the CW. Now Channel 50 is the CW. And that's because the license changed. All right, 3, we talk about the ownership of resources. Who owns those things? Hopefully you guys remember the story about the baseball player and his grandma and the type of rock that existed. All right, he's the only one that owned that rock, and so he's able, because he owns the resource, he has a monopoly on that situation. And the final barrier to entry, this is the one that everybody always studies, is a price strategy. This is when you have a monopolist created monopoly. This is the robber baron. This is the John Rockefellers who would drive down the price so low that his competition had to file bankruptcy, and he swooped in and bought him up. This is the kind that is the bad kind of monopoly. This is the kind of thing that we are always monitoring, that we want to keep an eye on to make sure these don't exist. So sometimes there are good monopolies and sometimes there are bad monopolies, but we have to deal with that situation. Okay, so in a monopoly, when we create the structure, we assume that at least one barrier to entry exists. 2, we assume there is no government regulation. And 3, we're also going to assume a single price monopolist, which kind of goes to that same thing that we talked about with margin utility, that prices stay the same across all units. All right, so with these assumptions, we now get to graph a monopoly. So we draw our initial curves as always. And if you recall, we still have the marginal revenue equals marginal cost rule to help us figure out what level that we should be producing at. But because this is a monopolist, all right, a couple things happen. First off, your demand curve and your MR curve are now separate. No more Mr. DARP. All right, so you have that to worry about. Your MC curve still exists. All right, still looks the same and everything else. So in this situation, you still want to be where MR equals MC. That will give you the quantity that you will produce in order to function as a monopolist. But the big difference is the price is where that quantity intersects the demand curve. So instead of just being Mr. DARP straight across like what you saw before, you still have MR equals MC, but you follow it all the way up to the demand curve, and that becomes your price quantity combination of production for a monopolist. All right, for a monopolist, all right, a couple things. All right, these are downward sloping because they are a price maker. They determine the price, not the market like in pure competition. Because in pure competition, it was perfectly elastic. In this situation, it is not perfectly elastic. All right. Also, your marginal revenue curve will be lower, or MR equals MC, will be lower than the price the monopolist has, so he can increase sales if he wants to. And the price will be set in the elastic region of the curve. I want to remind you guys, if you recall, up here is the elastic, right here would be the unit elastic, and down here would be the inelastic portion of it. Okay? And another cool part of this situation, there is no supply curve. Why is there no supply curve? Think about that for a second. Hopefully you came up with the answer that the monopolist is a supplier. So whatever the monopolist wants to supply, that's the supply curve. And that's the cool thing about it. Now, just like your pure competition, we want to know if monopoly is a profitable monopoly or a bad monopoly. It doesn't make money, because after all, what is a monopolist's goal? To make money. So let's draw out our situation here, you got your MR curve, you got your demand curve, you got your MC curve, and you do your price quantity combination. If you are profitable, your average total cost curve. All right, so I'm going to label this average total cost. Let me get this back in focus here for you. I'm sorry. There we go. All right, your average total cost curve in a profit will be above the MR curve, but below the demand curve. So this area would make it a profit monopoly. If your average total cost curve is above the demand curve, so we'll call that average total cost loss, you go from where MR equals MC up to demand, up to the average total cost curve, on across, and this area would be the loss. Now, a couple things I want to remind you guys of so you don't get confused. First off, profit and loss do not appear on the same curve or the same drawing. I just simply put it on there for paper's sake and for everything else. You need to draw it out on two separate curves. So you could have a loss, you could have a profit, and you could actually have a break-even point as well, and that would simply be your ATC curve would intersect where the price quantity combination on demand. So this would be ATC break even or in equilibrium situation. All right. So right now you need to get activity 33 packet from the sub, and this will be due tomorrow, and they will collect it then. Also, tomorrow you'll have a work day, so come prepared to work on Monopoly packets and graphs and another practice FRQ. It will help you out a lot. So, to end today with our usual ending segment, we have our cover song of the day. This is from one of my favorite bands, from the Foo Fighters. They did a cover of the song Baker Street, originally done by Jerry Rafferty. You guys might know this song. I don't know how many of you guys listen to some old late 70s, early 80s rock, but it's the original is very famous for its saxophone solo. Obviously, with Foo Fighters being some rockers, they turned the saxophone into a guitar solo. And so hopefully you enjoy that one, listen to it, let me know what you think. Also, if you have any questions, please email me. I should be stopping by at some point to pick up some assignments to grade. Maybe it'll be during one of your guys' classes. I'll stop by and say hi to pick that stuff up. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck, and hope you have a good one. Bye.